Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, July the 29th, 2025. Today, Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Well, it might have been late yesterday, depending on your time zone. And I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. You know, the Venus-Mars midpoint is often about attraction, it's about charisma, can be about sexuality. Mercury is the communication planet. So, you know, what does it mean for Mercury to be on the Venus-Mars midpoint? And I think it's a good idea to look at this midpoint configuration in some detail. But before I do that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, July the 29th. So here is the chart for today. This chart is, of course, set for noon, New York time. You will notice that on the chart it says Wednesday. That is a mistake, by the way, and it is Tuesday. And unfortunately, when I go through the 12 signs, at least up until Capricorn, I have Wednesday on all the charts. So forget that. It is Tuesday. You know, if you look at the date, it says Wednesday the 29th. Of course, it's Tuesday the 29th. So don't worry, I've got the positions of the planets right. It's just that the actual word Wednesday should read Tuesday. So sorry about that. And top right, that is sort of a cutout or collage kind of thing of Botticelli's Venus and Mars. You know, that is a reminder that we are talking about Venus and Mars in this video. And so here is the chart for today. We've got the moon in Libra, sort of early Libra, and you know, it went into Libra at 6:43 a.m. London time. So, you know, if you're in the Americas, then you know, throughout the day the moon will be in Libra. It went into Libra in the middle of the night. If you're in Europe, then early in the morning, moon goes into Libra. Same for Africa. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon won't go into Libra until sort of late afternoon, early evening. And aside from that, we have a semi-sextile between Mercury and Jupiter. So there's Mercury, there's Jupiter. They are 30 degrees apart. So the semi-sextile, it's kind of a challenging aspect. I wouldn't have said it was a bad aspect, but it's about two principles that are trying to get themselves together, that are trying to work out how to deal with each other. You know, Mercury in Leo plays Jupiter in Cancer. Very different energies. Mercury in Leo can be about one's pride. Okay, Mercury might be retrograde, but still, many of us think we know best. We think we've got the answers, and it's coming up against Jupiter. And the trouble about thinking we know all the answers is that we start to close down other possibilities. And so if we're thinking about how right we are, or we notice that other people are claiming they're completely in the right, then how can you contemplate anything further? You can't go beyond the situation, and so that would be incredibly limiting. And so that's that is the problem with Mercury semi-sextile Jupiter. But maybe there's a way around it. So it's good that we have opinions and that we're able to express these opinions and that we're proud of what we believe in. But at the same time, we've got to have the awareness that we could be wrong, or that there's something else going on that that goes beyond our own perceptions and our cognitions. And so that's possibly the main aspect of the day. Now, the moon, when it goes into Libra, it makes trine to Uranus. Moon trine Uranus is in fact it's a grand trine. So you've got moon in Libra trine Pluto, trine Uranus. So with this air grand trine, that does give the day a certain amount of energy. Things do flow, and maybe ideas flow, high-level ideas. This is Uranus and Pluto, quite close to the trine, and then the moon picks up on it. And so maybe we're able to express our desire for freedom, which there's something quite collective about it. And we have to make sure we're persistent, and we've got to maybe realize that we might hit some opposition. So we see, for example, that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. So moon opposition Saturn, that's a bit of a problem aspect. It could close things down. And moon in Libra wants to express itself, enjoys other people's company maybe, but then there's Saturn. Saturn, it could be someone, could be a situation, and it may feel that it's holding us back, and it's rather confusing because moon is not just opposition Saturn, it's also opposition Neptune. So we'd like to do things, but there's a fear, or at least there could be moments of fear. Moon also makes a trine to Pluto, and that's all part of this grand trine in air that I was talking about. And finally, the moon makes a sextile to the sun, and moon sextile sun. It's a relatively frequent aspect, and I would have said that it's entirely fortunate. Moon in Libra plays the sun in Leo. It is a time when, despite everything, something is in balance, and if we try hard, we can get the positive and the negative in balance with one another, and that means that there is a way to be able to relate to other people. Now, one midpoint configuration going on is that Mercury is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, and this, there's Venus and there's Mars, and you can see that Mercury is sort of right in the middle of the two, and this conjunction between Mercury and the Venus-Mars midpoint is something I'm going to be talking about, in detail later in the video, but the basic message with Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint is that, it says something about how people express themselves, and some people are very charming. We can be very charming. We can be charismatic. We can be attractive. Our words can be carefully chosen, and those carefully chosen words can have an influence, and people can listen to us. So, the message is going to be important. Here is the chart set for Sydney, noon in Sydney, which is a representative of Australasia, and you will see that at noon the moon is in Virgo. So this is a reminder that if you are in Australasia or Eastern Asia, for much of the day the moon is not in Libra. It's in late Virgo, and it's going to be making a square to Venus. Perhaps there's more indulgence in the air if you're in Australasia. Moon square Venus may be that there are certain relationships that have to be negotiated, and it may represent a mismatch. Moon in Virgo plays Venus in Gemini, so something is not quite connecting, and maybe we'll get caught by the wrong details. I mean, that may be one thing, but it's a short aspect. It's the moon. It's not going to last very long, but you can't expect to get on with everyone. And perhaps if you are in Australasia, your first instincts about a situation or about a person may not be right, or at least you shouldn't express those first instincts. You should wait for the situation to clarify. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and we have a quincunx between Jupiter and the Earth. So there is Jupiter at 6 Cancer, there's the Earth at 6 or 7 Aquarius, and what does that mean? It's probably quite a minor aspect, but it could be excessive. We could take something too far. We want things to be in a certain way, and we can't find it, we can't get it, so we feel that we have to do something, and in the process we exaggerate, or could be over emotional, or we could spend too much money, but it's unnecessary, and we probably have to take the Earth just as it is. And also that Mercury trine Uranus is still in operation. And so remember, Mercury is also conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint geocentrically, and so with Mercury trine Uranus, there is a way to express ourselves in a way that is larger than life, and that does get noticed. So that's the heliocentric view. Okay, you could also say that Mercury is making a sextile to Neptune. So Mercury sextile Neptune, you could think, well, that's perhaps about getting in touch with sort of higher level powers. That might be one way of looking at it. Mercury is also square the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. So there could be moments where we're not sort of quite there, we're in touch with something we don't really understand, and those semi-conscious moments could be quite informative, but they could be quite dangerous if we're supposed to be doing something constructive and practical, and then we sort of flip into an altered state of consciousness. Well, that's just really not what we want to do, is it? So we've got to be grounded, and if we want to be spiritual or flip into a different dimension, we've got to make sure that we do that in an environment which is safe. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, July the 29th, 2025. Aries, you're starting to recognize that other people do matter. Okay, you always recognize that other people matter, but at the moment, with the moon moving into Libra, you have to consider the other, the possibility that there are alternative views, and that maybe you can't do everything on your own. But is that going to work out? Not necessarily. So you have this issue that you have to deal with other people. You have to accept their presence and their existence. But at the same time, you might find that they are rather uncooperative. I mean, the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. And so with moon opposition Saturn, yes, certain relationships may be rather unfulfilling. Someone is holding something back. Now, it could be you. Saturn is now in your own sign. Okay, it might be going retrograde in your own sign, but it's still there. And in your own way, you can be quite tough, and you can also be quite rigid at the moment. And your own particular way of viewing the world, perhaps your rigidity, could be preventing other people from expressing themselves. So which way round is it? Is it you who can't express yourself because of other people's actions, or is it possibly completely different? Is it really possible that what you are giving off, at least on an unconscious level, is in a way closing things down, and people are finding it difficult to be themselves when they get close to you? And it's not just about close relationships. It's just about people in general. It just does feel that they're holding something back, and they can't quite be themselves. And you can do your best. You can try to be open-minded. You can try to be welcoming, but even that might not be enough. So really what I'm saying, Aries, is that you shouldn't be too reliant on other people. I mean, other people may be able to offer you something in the end, but it could take sort of it could take patience and hard work. I mean, the last aspect of a day, it's probably one of the last aspects of a day, is Moon sextile Sun. Now, Moon sextile Sun is an aspect that's entirely fortunate, and this might indicate that dealing with other people is a real battle, but it's a battle that in the end you can win. You know, you keep going, you make a special effort to be reasonable and accommodating. Okay, not too accommodating. You don't want to give anything up. You don't want to sacrifice your essential freedoms. But in the end, you can find some level of understanding. And it's important to find that understanding that you don't compromise too much, that you are quite clear about who you are and what you're good at, and what you enjoy. Because if you feel that you're giving something up, that you're compromising, then that's going to make you annoyed, and that annoyance is going to be hard to miss. So I would have said, Aries, don't regard other people as being essential, and don't regard them as being a problem. Just do what feels right and be yourself, and in the end, things should work out. Taurus, you are looking at the way things are set up, and you are asking questions. Is this right? You kind of feel that things could be better organized. People have tried their hardest, but it's just not quite good enough. And you have your essential personality, and you have your own needs, and you just might think that the way things are set up at the moment is just not giving you sufficient self-expression. And so, Taurus, there is a question of what do you do about it? It might be tempting to feel that you should do something very definite, that you make a fuss, and perhaps even you might want to assume a conflict, and that approach is probably not advisable, because you just might be creating a conflict where it is unnecessary, and in a way you might be underestimating your own power. If you accept that you have the power to change, that you have the power to reconfigure, then things can work very quickly, and they can work in a way that is powerful but is not necessarily noticeable. So maybe, Taurus, today is about having your own quiet revolution. I mean, it's a very real revolution. Big things are happening, but it can be your revolution, and you can just make things just as you'd like them to be, and it really doesn't involve anyone else. Now, that is a sort of perfect situation. Now, this doesn't take away from the fact that many Taurians today could feel frustration. There are things you'd like to do, and somehow the world may be conspiring to stop it happening. And this is especially the case if you're of the view that you need outside help, outside cooperation. If you're of that view, then you could be disappointed. And additionally, Taurus, you don't want to become overly pessimistic. Some Taurians may be inclined to sort of move into a sort of spiral of negative thinking. They're thinking about perhaps all the things that could go wrong, and there may even be an apparent inevitability to it. And that's not what you want to do, Taurus. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where you are creating self-fulfilling prophecies. If you take the view that it's all it's all hopeless, there's no point in trying, there's no point in asserting yourself, then yeah, it might well happen as you had feared, but it shouldn't do. And so Taurus, it is very important that you are well aware of your own power, and that you don't assume conflicts, and you also think about how you can create positive change. And positive change is about just deciding what kind of revolution you want to put into action. You don't have to expect immediate results. You make one change, you make another change, and you keep making changes. Each individual change might seem to be going nowhere, but if you keep moving, keep working away, you don't analyze things too much, then in the end you will start making progress. But you do have to be patient. You cannot expect immediate results. And as I've already said, don't allow your own negative cognitions to trip you up. Just because you're feeling negative, it doesn't mean anything. It's just your perceptions. So it's very important that you don't get caught out by your perceptions. Gemini, the headline aspect for today, or at least the headline midpoint aspect for today, is Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And later in the video I will be talking quite a lot about this configuration. Now, Mercury on the Venus midpoint Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint is a very charismatic configuration. It is about charm and about attractiveness, because you're putting Venus and Mars together here. Venus and Mars, well, you could say Venus and Mars are the planets of female and male sexuality. They're the polarity of attraction. They create that sort of dynamic tension that allows people to sort of take an interest. It's not just about sexuality, it's about charisma and charm as well. And it's about getting noticed. And so Gemini, it is a time when you definitely can get noticed. People, will sort of recognize that you've got something special to offer. You might not think that you've got anything to offer, but you have, and you can come over as someone who is, pretty exciting, and there's no harm in being, I won't say boastful or arrogant, but you don't want to underestimate yourself, and there's no harm in talking up, your abilities, talking up what you can do. There's no need to exaggerate. Just give people an idea of what you can do for them, and also consider the many ways in which you can be attractive. It's not just what you wear; it's in particular what you say, and words can be important. It's not about necessarily saying a lot of things, but if words can be suggestive, and you can give the impression that you've got a lot to offer, and yeah, people will listen to you. So Gemini, it's just important that you really make the most of yourself in a social sense, and also an interpersonal sense. So if you're interested in relationships, if that matters to you, and you want to get close to someone, for whatever reason that relationship might be, then you can be very effective. You can indeed, be charming, and you'll know what to say, you'll know what to say, you'll know what to miss out, and you can grab people's attention, and you can attract their curiosity. But it's not about you giving anything up. It's not about you going out of your way to do things to attract people. Essentially, it's about being yourself. And and it's also not just about Mercury on Venus Mars midpoint. The moon is in Libra, and with the moon moving into Libra, that is, generally speaking, good news for Geminis, because Libra is Libra is an air sign, and there is a grand trine in air signs. Moon is in Libra. It's making a trine to Uranus in Gemini. It's making a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. So through your own creative endeavors, Gemini, you can really get things moving. And if other people are involved, that's great, but they don't have to be involved. You can do something that is all about you, all about what you're good at, what you enjoy, and things can really happen here. And in fact, when you're thinking about your motivations for an action, for an endeavor, whatever you're doing today, while it's true that you can be very charming and charismatic and attractive, the motivations for your actions should come from yourself. They should not come from other people. For example, you shouldn't do something to make another person happy. You shouldn't do something because you want to fit in. If you do that, that could spoil everything. It really could. So in fact, motivation really is essential, and that might be the key to your success. So while I'm telling you that you can be attractive today, being attractive, attracting people should not be your fundamental motivation. It should be a byproduct. So if you're being yourself, you will naturally get outside attention. If you're putting your own priorities first, again, you will naturally get outside attention. You can explain yourself extremely well, but you don't have to be nervous in explaining yourself. Just say what comes to mind and be natural, Gemini. And that is the way in which you can really have a successful and, happy day. Cancer. Moon is edging into Libra. Kind of depends on where you are. If you're in Australasia, then the moon might not or won't be in Libra until sort of quite late in the day, maybe sort of late afternoon. If you're in the Americas, the moon moves into Libra, really early in the day, maybe around sort of midnight or something like that. If you're in Europe, it's still early in the morning. So I think we can, by and large, regard the moon as being in Libra. And with the moon in Libra, Cancer, it does say something about you and what your priorities are. And at the moment, Cancer, I think that you are probably thinking about making things as stable as possible. You're not trying to stir things up, and you want to make sure that your own space is all in order, and you may not take kindly to distractions and people telling you what to do. And so at Cancer, it's a day when you may be relatively self-contained. Now, the moon, when it moves into Libra, it makes a number of aspects. For example, it makes a grand trine in air signs. There it is. There's the moon in Libra, an air sign, trine Uranus, trine Pluto. So all of the three air signs are involved. Now this grand trine in air signs, from a Cancerian perspective, is not very public. It's what is going on behind closed doors, what your perceptions are, and it may say something about your spirituality and how you are relating to your own unconscious material. And it could feel, Cancer, that something is brewing under the surface, that you're becoming aware of something that just wasn't there before, or it might have been there all the time, right from the beginning, but it's only now that it's making sense. Maybe you've caught up with the universe, or perhaps it's the universe catching up with you. And so do think about what is being presented, what kind of ideas you're having, and can you do this in a public setting? I don't think you can. I think you really do need space and privacy if you want to make the most of this grand trine. And while this is happening, the moon is making an opposition to Saturn, and this moon opposition Saturn, it could be problematic, and it's kind of saying that you don't really want to be disturbed, you don't really want to be bothered, and you don't want to have to deal with outside energies, people telling you what to do, having to make appointments. Even if you're going into a job, you might want to just go through the motions of going into a job because you'd rather be somewhere else, or perhaps you prefer to be working at home. Well, if you're working at home, then that's fine. I think, in fact, if you're working at home, then the grand trine in air signs might be quite useful, because you might be quite inspired, and you might have some great ideas in the comfort of your own home, ideas that you wouldn't have if you were sort of on a public stage. And also this moon Saturn opposition may say something about relationships. Relationships may not go entirely your way, and you can't get on with everyone, and even people you do get on with, you might not get on with them, very well today. So perhaps Cancer, you should just, accept the situation. Though, right at the end of the day, things probably get easier. The moon moves on; it makes a sextile to the sun, and this is especially the case if you're in the Americas. By the late afternoon, that moon sextile, or even not even late afternoon, by this afternoon, if you're in the Americas, that moon sextile the sun is starting to make its influence felt, and you should be feeling easier about yourself, and you may not be quite so defensive, and you can perhaps start to concentrate on what is important in a sort of a relaxed way. And that moon sextile sun, whenever it happens, does allow you to focus on your priorities, and indeed your material priorities. For example, things like money. You will have a certain talent when it comes to money and the material world, and so if you see an opportunity, then you make sure that you make the most of it. Leo, you can get attention today. There is something about you that is compelling, and when you talk about your ideas, when you tell people what's on your mind, you're going to be listened to, and so don't hold back. And it's not necessarily that you have to just do non-stop talking. I mean, you'll just know how to pull the levers, and so you can be fairly sort of persuasive, yes, in your own way. And if there's something you want people to do, then I think you can find a way. And one aspect that we do have at the moment is the moon is sextile the sun. The sun is still in Leo, your sign. Moon making that sextile, it's a very harmonious aspect. And with that moon sextile sun, you can just put people at their ease, and you can say the right things. And in general, I think that you're going to be someone who is going to be trusted, and you'll be helped by the fact that Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint, and I'll be going on about that sort of later in the video. But you've got Mercury still moving through your sign, might be retrograde, but does that really matter at the moment if it's on the Venus-Mars midpoint? So Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, does really indicate that you can be convincing, and you can certainly get people's attention, and certainly in terms of what you say, you can come over as really someone who is quite attractive. So do make the most of this opportunity, and don't allow yourself to be put off by early problems. So the beginning of the day, the moon is opposition Saturn. Okay, beginning of the day. Perhaps from a viewpoint of America or Europe, the moon is opposition Saturn, and it might feel that you're not getting anywhere, that you've hit a block, but it's illusory. That moon Saturn opposition is a temporary issue, and just because you find yourself not getting on with someone, or you find that there are incompatibilities, don't take it too seriously. Keep going, keep moving, and as soon as that moon sextile sun starts to manifest, then you'll realize that things are moving, and that you really can get everyone's attention. And so whatever it is you want today, I think there's an excellent chance that you can get hold of it. Virgo. The big aspect today, at least from a midpoint view, is Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. I've decided to make a big deal about it, and at the end of the video I'll be going on and on about Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. But it inevitably has to have an impact on you, because Mercury is your ruler, and with Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, Virgo, you can be very charming, and you can say the right things, and you will additionally be able to use your insights. You can observe people at a distance, and you can additionally use your memories of people's past behaviors, whatever they revealed in the past. You can use this information in a way to improve your position. I mean, okay, there is an element of manipulation there, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. So, in quite a subtle way, Virgo, you can get people onto your side, and you'll say things which just are compelling, which really hit home, that people just can't ignore, and it may even seem as if you've got some hidden information, or even some psychic ability. I'm not indicating that you do have any psychic ability, or we all have a certain amount of psychic ability. Maybe you are finely tuned, but indeed, if you have any psychic ability to read someone's mind or read someone's heart, then I think that with this Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, now is a time when you can very much use it. And yes, you can use it to your advantage. And so, what is your advantage? Well, you probably want to be popular. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be popular. You also want to be successful, and you maybe want to be financially successful. And the moon is in Libra, and Libra in the Virgo chart can have a relationship to money, and so that could be important to you. And you might feel that from a financial perspective, things aren't perfect, that things could be better, and that might be something you want to change, and you can change it, because moon in Libra is making a trine to Uranus, it's making a trine to Pluto, so we've got this grand trine in air signs, and this grand trine, although it's in air signs, although it involves Uranus and Pluto, is quite material. It's about you wanting to change the material world in such a way that you can benefit from it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to benefit from it. Of course, this might not be appropriate. Maybe financial issues aren't of any concern to you, but if they are, it does seem, with the moon making a trine to Uranus and Pluto, through your own conscious efforts, and of course through your natural charm, which is going to be intensified by Mercury on Venus-Mars midpoint, you can really go a long way towards boosting your position and creating a situation where you can benefit in very real and very material ways. And it's down to you to make things happen. And don't be put off by temporary setbacks. It might seem at first that other people aren't being very cooperative, or indeed that they're not being very responsive to your charms, but you've just got to keep going. And if you do keep going, you will definitely have an impact, and it will be a favourable impact. Favourable because you can benefit. Libra. The moon is now in your sign. Okay, it might not go into your sign until this afternoon if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but it gets there in the end. And so the moon in Libra might mean that the spotlight is on you, and you're thinking about what can you do, what should you be doing, and you're thinking about opportunities, but you're also thinking about what might be able to hold you back if you gave it the chance. So when the moon moves into Libra, it's true that it straight away makes an opposition to Saturn, and so having Moon Saturn opposition across the main axis of your chart, it doesn't sound like a bundle of laughs, does it? And so what might that be about? Well, it might be about you and other people, or your perceptions of other people, or just could be just your perceptions of the limitations being placed upon you by the outside world. And so Moon opposition Saturn might represent your perceptions that there is something quite heavy getting in your way. You have all these things that you would like to do, but the question is, can you do them? Because it just does feel that there are certain people, certain situations that just don't want you to succeed. And it's not just the fact that the moon is opposition Saturn, it's also opposition Neptune. So there could be a lot of sort of confusion and fear, and in the first instance you might be of a view that really nothing can happen, that you might be stuck. And this could then lead to other sort of negative trains of thought, and you sort of come to the conclusion that the whole thing is hopeless. Now, I absolutely do not want to create self-fulfilling prophecies here, and what I think I'm talking about is just your perceptions. And perceptions mean a great deal. If we have negative perceptions, they can feel real. This is the way it is. And I'm telling you, Libra, this is not the way it is. It's just the way it seems. And your job, Libra, is to work with the material in front of you, and be very honest about it. Do consider the psychological aspect of things, that people who seem to be a major problem, who seem to be thwarting you at every turn, they may turn out to be just paper tigers, or just their strengths may just be figments of your imagination. That is the case, I believe, and you have to follow the moon through. The moon is in Libra. I mean, that is, as I said at the beginning, that's a great place of the moon to be in. You are in control, or rather, you can be in control. And in the end, the moon makes a sextile to the sun. That's the last aspect, major aspect of the day, at least looking at things from a perspective of Greenwich Mean Time. the last major, the Greenwich Mean Time, that's the last aspect of the day, moon sextile sun. And so moon sextile sun, it's a great aspect. And it's great for you because the moon is in Libra and it's sextile the sun in its own sign. And so with that sextile, through your own efforts and through your own positive thinking, you can turn things round. And what seems to be an obstacle is just going to be a nothing. And you're not necessarily on your own. And you certainly shouldn't regard everyone as being an enemy or as being someone to be handled or to be avoided. With moon sextile sun, in the end, you can get the support you need. And the moon having made that sextile sun, it eventually makes a sextile to Mercury. I mean, that's more about tomorrow, but it's all there. So Libra, whether or not it's a good day does depend on you, and you mustn't allow some sort of negative cognitive set to sort of get you down. Things are good if you can see that they are good. Scorpio, you don't have to do everything. It's not your job. And it's not your responsibility. You might believe it's your responsibility, but there are times when you don't necessarily have to do anything. There is, of course, the temptation to do something. And there's been a lot of temptation around recently because Mars has been conjunct the South Node, and sort of Mars conjunct the South Node is potentially about the inappropriate use of force or getting too worked up about something. And recently matters weren't helped by the fact that the moon was making conjunctions to the South Node and Mars as well. So that might have sort of motivated you to really push yourself, but pushing yourself not necessarily in the right direction. But now that the moon is changing sign, the moon is moving out of Virgo, it's into Libra, moving into Libra, you can settle down, and you absolutely shouldn't think that there's anything that needs to be done. And there could be a sense of obligation, that there are certain things you must do, but I don't think there's anything you must do. I think it might be a time for observation, and also perhaps for just tuning into your own feelings and your own perceptions, and taking stock of what has happened. Now, if on the other hand you were to spend time with other people, you felt that there was a social obligation, then it could be a difficult day. I think that other people may not be very helpful. They may not be forthcoming. If you try to interact with them, then I think that there's a good chance that you're going to end up quite disappointed. It will seem as if they've got nothing to offer. They're not trying, and if you scratch the surface, you might find that the situation is even worse. That there are people out there who have real negativity, and they are assuming the worst. And if you're dealing with someone who is assuming the worst, well, that could drag you down as well, and that might also say something about certain relationships. You may not be impressed by people's attitudes, and they may not be in the mood for doing anything constructive, and they might regard a lot of things as being rather hopeless. And so that's a good reason, Scorpio, for just being pretty self-contained. You don't need any support right now, and if you're doing things on your own, in your own way, then you'll be fine. But if you start to get involved with other people, or at least try to get involved with other people, try to get involved with outside organizations and institutions. The whole thing could be very disappointing. But don't worry, because today, Scorpio, you do have a lot of choices. Sagittarius. At the moment, you're trying hard. You're trying hard to be friendly and positive, and you want things to work. And if you take this kind of approach, you need to recognize that it may be difficult and that you might have to be patient. Few things are going to happen just immediately and spontaneously. It's just not that kind of day. And so everything does have to be worked on, and you must be ready for a few setbacks, and those setbacks could take the form of other people's negativity. A lot of people are negative, and that's just the way it is. But right now, Sagittarius, you want to be sociable, and you can be sociable. But if you are going to be sociable, just bear in mind that it's just going to take a long time. And think about your charm. How is your charm going to work? You can be charming, but it's a kind of a slow charm at the moment. It takes a long time for you to have the full impact. So you're going to have to work on other people. You're just going to have to be there for them, and you might have to deal with setbacks. You might have to deal with other people's negativity, because a lot of people are quite negative at the moment. Not everyone. I mean, Mercury is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, so there are a few people out there who are very compelling, and they are sort of demanding your attention, and you want to give them your attention because these people seem interesting in it, and you therefore perhaps have to make the right choices. Some people are of no use whatsoever; they'll just drag you down. Other people, other people, a minority of people, but a real minority of people. I mean, they are going to exist. It's not just some random finding. There are people out there who are going to have real charm, and you can benefit from them if you can find them. You will be able to find them, but you've got to make the right choices. So by all means, have a busy social life today, but you can't have an unfocused social life, just going from one person to another, just thinking everything is fine. It's not fine. You have to make the right choices, because some people could just be awful, and they could be negative, and they could be a real downer. But in the end, today the moon is making a sextile to the sun. It gets to that sextile in the sun, sextile to the sun in the end, and moon sextile sun. Sun is in Leo, and that is a very fortunate aspect. And through your own efforts and your own positivity, you can find the right way of being, and there can be a sense of caring and sharing, but you'll have to work at it. Capricorn, you believe that today there are things that need to be done, and it's not a day for Capricorns to be doing nothing. And the moon is in Libra. The moon is making trines to Uranus and trine to Pluto, and so that could be quite energizing. So this grand trine in air, moon, Uranus, Pluto making a trine to each other, it's not an energy that Capricorns immediately respond to. It might feel a bit too random and chaotic for the average Capricorn, but it's worth pursuing. And so if you're dealing with something that seems chaotic then don't necessarily reject it, because it can work for you. And if there is change and chaos, then Capricorn, that's something you should welcome, because it's going to help. It's going to help move you along, and it's also going to help you sort of get in touch with your own ambitions. And so this today, really think about what you want, and don't be put off, because one aspect we do have today is an opposition between the Moon and Saturn, and this Moon-Saturn opposition could appear to really bring you to a standstill, and you might think that really there's no point with that Moon opposition Saturn, but it's not going to last forever, and you need to work with it. And what is it telling you, this Moon opposition Saturn? Well, what this Moon-Saturn opposition is encouraging you to do is to work hard to take something that is chaotic. It might be exciting, but it's chaotic, and it could even be threatening, and to work hard and to make it into something real. And once you've done that, you can then sort of project it outwards in terms of your ambitions and whatever it is you want to achieve. Because I think that there is, if you're honest with yourself, quite a lot that you want to get done, and I think you will be able to get it done. And additionally, I think that in most cases other people can be a plus rather than a minus, and that might not be immediately apparent. So again, if you work on other people, if you try to get their attention, if you listen to them, but you tell them about your ideas as well, and you try to find common ground, and you're quite assertive about it, then I think that you will make progress. So it's a day, Capricorn, where you may not feel entirely comfortable in terms of being outside your comfort zone. But if you can work outside your comfort zone and appreciate that there is a real challenge, a constructive challenge, then I think that you can go a long way towards achieving some of your ambitions. Aquarius. Today there is a grand trine in air signs, and this grand trine in air signs is likely to have an effect on you. You've got the Moon in Libra, making a trine to Uranus, making a trine to Pluto. So with this grand trine, things are moving, and they're moving on sort of quite an inspirational level. So Aquarius, it is a time when you can be inspired, and you can see what might be possible if you can just allow your imagination free rein. Uranus and Pluto, they do represent quite high level forces of a sort of cosmic nature, and so it's important that you find a way of tuning into them, and you shouldn't assume that you've got all the answers. And one reason why we might think that you've got all the answers is because there is an opposition aspect between the Moon and Saturn. Now, Saturn is your ruler, and so with Saturn as your ruler, might be rather stuck in its ways. And particularly as Saturn is conjunct Neptune. So with Saturn conjunct Neptune, there may be moments, Aquarius, where you don't feel entirely certain. You're not sure about where things are going, and maybe you don't want to take risks. But the Moon is making this opposition to Saturn and Neptune. So there's some danger that your caution prevents you from taking advantage of everything else that's on offer. The Saturn could sort of bring the grand trine to a halt. I mean, that's a possibility. But with another way of looking at it, Saturn can represent structure. So you have this grand trine in air signs. And then Saturn is acting like a kite. I think a kite is the right phrase. So a kite is a formation in a chart where you've got a grand trine, and then you've got an opposition across the grand trine. So you've got Saturn sextile Uranus, sextile Pluto, and so Saturn, if it's handled correctly, could allow you to bring everything down to earth. And so what seems to be unreal, just a vague possibility, can sort of filter down and can become part of your sort of everyday consciousness. So just because something seems frightening, seems otherworldly, seems beyond your everyday experience, doesn't mean that you can't make it real. And if you can make it real, I think this is a good thing. As an Aquarian, you should be always looking to go beyond yourself. You shouldn't fall into the trap of being too set in your ways. That's always a danger with Aquarians, Aquarius being a fixed sign, but it is unnecessary. And you need to, expand your sort of overall level of awareness and just become aware of new things, because, that is very much the way forward. So, do take advantage of this, and additionally, don't think that you're alone. That you can't trust other people. You can't rely on other people. If you make a real effort to forge connections with others, I think that your efforts will pay off. So don't be afraid of being gently assertive, in your various relationships, because a bit of assertion may be just what people need. You can sort of get things moving. Pisces, you can see the possibilities for being part of something. I think you really would like to be part of something, and if you're part of something, you feel whole, and you don't want to have to do sort of everything on your own, or feel isolated, and that may say something about your attitude to relationships. But there's a bit of a contradiction here, because when you are involved with someone, there's always the danger that something could go wrong. And where there is connection, there's always the possibility of decay as well. And so that might sound a rather sort of complicated and contradictory theme, but it's almost saying where there's life there's death, and where there's death there's life. And that may be something that you're really thinking about. And in general today, Pisces, the mysteries of life and death may be quite close at hand. And that also could be connected with the fact that we've got a grand trine. The moon is trine Uranus, the moon is trine Pluto, and you're looking for transformation at some level. You know that things aren't quite as they should be, and other people could help. They could help move things along. That's true, but where there's a person, there's a problem. And when you get close to other people, particularly if you know them well, you can perhaps see how things have changed. And it's not always about growth, it can be about decay as well. So you could say, Pisces, that the very act of connecting with the world has its own risks. And yes, it has its own sadness. And you might then be sort of looking for a way to sort of detach yourself from all of this. But how do you detach yourself? If you sort of physically detach yourself, then you're divorcing yourself from reality. So you do need to have a perspective today, and a perspective which just goes beyond the material. I mean, that sounds rather sort of far-fetched, and perhaps it's just sort of pie in the sky. But I do think that these forces, these forces are at work, and there is a lot for you to think about, and there is, a lot for you to take on board. And sorry to sound rather abstract, but it does, in some respects, seem to be quite an abstract day. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now I want to look at things from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 56, which is the Wanderer, and it doesn't move. So with this hexagram, we may feel that we're not quite connected. The Wanderer is about being in a situation where we feel that we're far from home. Now, we might physically be at home, but we might be involved in something that we just don't fully understand, and we're quite naive about it. And because of that, we might make mistakes, and we might make assumptions. We might assume that we've got it all sorted out when actually we haven't. And it's not that we're stupid or anything like that. It's rather that there's a lot of learning to do, and we're on unfamiliar ground. And the first thing, if you are on unfamiliar ground, is to actually recognize that there is a lack of familiarity. And so, what do? You can seek outside assistance. I mean, that is a good approach if you are the Wanderer. And you need to rely on, everything you've got. And you should not expect rapid progress because, there are no moving lines. That's how we feel. We feel perhaps rather alienated and not comfortable. And that may not apply just to everything. It may just might apply to one activity that we're involved with. We're trying to involve ourselves with it. We're trying to make progress, but it's hard work. And if we look at the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram underneath the Wanderer, which I like to do if the hexagram is locked, if there are no moving lines, it is hexagram number 28, which is a preponderance of the great. And so the preponderance of the great represents a big load, something we're trying to deal with, and it's just almost feels like it's too much for us. It's heavy, and it's heavy because we don't understand it. And it's important, it's really important, but we don't get it. We try, but it's not making full sense. And with the preponderance of the great, as the underlying hexagram of the Wanderer, that Wanderer, you think of a Wanderer having a backpack, having something on the back, and it's heavy, and it's not easy. And we can make progress, but we shouldn't try to make fast progress, because if we try to do things quickly with a locked hexagram, we're not going to get very far. So maybe it's just all about sort of getting through today, not making huge commitments, and certainly not thinking we understand things, because we don't understand things. The important things today are out of reach. We're not going to make the connections we're looking for, I don't think. And so it's important perhaps that we think ahead, and we perhaps think about where are we going to get help, or perhaps it's down to us. Maybe we need to read the instruction book, look it up over the internet. We need to think about it. Is it going to be a resolution today? Probably not. Is it going to be a resolution tomorrow? That is entirely possible. So now let me finish with the astrology. And I just wanted to look at the fact that Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So when you're talking about midpoints, it is a way of doing astrology. It's a way of looking at aspects. It's not just aspects to planets, it's aspects to midpoints. And the aspect series one looks at when one's dealing with midpoints are the hard aspects: conjunctions, oppositions, squares, semisquares, sesquiquadrates. You do not look at trines or sextiles. Okay, you can look at trines and sextiles, but in the first instance, one should try to keep it dynamic. And as I always say, a close semi-square is always going to work better than a close trine. Certainly, a semi-square is an aspect you shouldn't avoid in looking at a chart. And a trine, yeah, especially if a trine is not close. I think trines, you don't necessarily have to use trines in your astrology. I mean, it might sound heretical, but as far as I can see, if you've got a trine with a 3-degree orb, unless it's part of some wider configuration, maybe a grand trine or something else, you can usually get away with ignoring it. But a close semi-square, close sesquiquadrate, within half a degree, for example, you cannot, I don't think, get away with ignoring it. So here is the here's the exact moment that Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. It's sort of New York time. So there's Venus and there's Mars, and Mercury is exactly on that Venus-Mars midpoint. And I'm not going to worry too much about that precise moment. So New York time, in fact, it was late on Monday. I mean, very late on Monday, sort of 11:24 p.m. I make it, but Mercury was exactly on the Venus-Mars midpoint. I mean, it may be about maybe a minute either side. And so what does that mean? I mean, Venus-Mars as a pair is about attraction, of course. It has a lot to do with sexuality and desire and charisma and charm, and also the opposite. Venus-Mars is a very personal combination. Some people find other people really attractive. Other people find them repulsive, and that is the issue with Venus-Mars. But when you've got Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, or indeed square or semi-square, I think Mercury opposition the Venus-Mars midpoint, I think, is impossible. I don't think geocentrically you can have Mercury opposition the Venus-Mars midpoint. And the reason for that is that Mercury and Venus are always relatively close to one another. So I think it's going to be hard work to get Mercury making that opposition. I may be wrong on that. I need to give it some thought. So Mercury is about how we communicate. And so if Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint, making a dynamic aspect of the Venus-Mars midpoint, you might get the idea of someone who is very communicative and very charming about it. They can use words in a way that is really difficult to resist. And so if you're thinking about what does it mean for Mercury to be on the Venus-Mars midpoint like now, clever people, charming people, people who are very charismatic, perhaps people who are dangerous because they're so charismatic. If you're into politics, you might associate populism with Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Snake oil salesmen or saleswomen who are selling their wares, and they're being very clever about it. Though there may be another aspect to Mercury on Venus-Mars. It might be the demonstration of violence. Now that might sound a bit weird, but Venus and Mars, you could argue, are the planets of war. And Venus is a planet of victory through via Nike and the Roman equivalent of Victoria, and sort of Mars would be the god of war. We all know about the god of war. So you put Venus and Mars together, so there could be something warlike about it, and perhaps it's about communicating one's aggression. So that could be a way in which Mercury on Venus-Mars midpoint does work. So what I want to do in this video, for the end of this video, is just to look at some examples of Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, and I'm going to be looking at conjunctions, squares, and semi-squares and sesquiquadrates just to see some examples. I'm going to start with events, and one event which had Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint was the debut of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, I believe, came into being on January the 3rd, 2009. And so Bitcoin came into being with Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So Bitcoin, Mercury in Aquarius conjunct the North Node. That's a very Bitcoin idea. This is new, Mercury in Aquarius. This is new, and it's revolutionary, and it's conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So you might say that this currency, this new asset class, has a charisma of its own. So maybe it's not just people that can be sexy. It can be perhaps assets that can be glamorous. And so maybe Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint describes Bitcoin and its advent at the beginning of 2009. Now, when Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint, it can represent the start of battles and wars. One of the most important battles of the Second World War was the Battle of Kursk on July the 5th, 1943. It was this big armoured battle in Western Russia, which I think one of the biggest tank battles ever. And it started as Mercury was on the Venus-Mars midpoint at the time. So Mercury, something came into being, ideas came into being, and Venus and Mars, potentially the planets of war, were coming into being, were manifesting, and Venus and Mars might be about violent actions and assassinations, attempted assassinations. So the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, there was an assassination attempt on May the 15th of last year, and there's Mercury, and you can see Mercury's on the Venus-Mars midpoint, Mercury in Aries. So someone has an idea, and Venus and Mars, these potentially quite violent aspects. Again, we forget about the violent aspect of Venus, but if you see it as a planet of victory, or you make an association with Nike, and I don't know, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it was true that there was an assassination attempt regarding Fico with Venus conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. Another assassination attempt, which actually worked, was the killing of the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. And so at the time, Mercury was, in this case, Mercury was semi-square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So there's Mars, there's Venus, and so Mercury making that semi-square. So perhaps we have to think about what Venus and Mars actually means. Maybe, indeed, what Mercury means. Can we really associate Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint as an assassination attempt? I think this just could be a matter of coincidence. Now, Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint can be very good at communicating your violent intentions, and communicating, for example, if you are an organization which regards violence as being important, it might be good to have Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint when you come into being. So Hamas came into being, I believe, on December the 14th, 1987, and Hamas has Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Now, you might say that Mercury on a Venus-Mars midpoint for Hamas, remember, it's all about charisma. It's about your message and how you can be glamorized. And Hamas has been very effective at glamorizing itself. So, for example, even though you've got an organization which is violent, incredibly violent, it sort of invaded Israel on October the 7th, 2023, committed appalling atrocities, and is not exactly known for being really into human rights. Not great if for example, the way gays got treated in Gaza. I think it is true that they were sort of thrown off buildings, but still, it's got Mercury on a Venus-Mars midpoint. It doesn't matter, and it has garnered considerable support in the West, in spite of the atrocities on October the 7th, 2023. And it's also garnered a lot of support in Gaza. In the 1980s, 2006, I think there were elections. It was the people of Gaza voted for Hamas. I don't know whether they had another chance at voting for them, but they voted for them. And again, if you want to get people's support, being founded when Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint, it's really useful. And so I think Hamas is a very good example of Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, and it's all about communication. It's all about the message, and being an organization that is really very effective at propagandizing itself. And in spite of all its shortcomings, it's supported by progressives in the West. And even though Hamas is not really a particularly progressive organization, and talking about charisma, one of the most charismatic American presidents was, of course, JFK, John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy, when he was inaugurated as, at the time of his inauguration, there's a difference between the inauguration and the oath. When he took his oath of office, which I think would be fairly close to when he became president. He became president at noon. When he took his oath at 12:51, and at that time Mercury was square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So that is a great time for taking the oath of office. But his great speeches, what was the speech? Ask not what your country can do for you, and all of that kind of stuff. Seen as being sort of a young, attractive president, and so he takes office when Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And I think that describes Kennedy really completely. And so I think that's a really good example of Mercury square the Venus-Mars midpoint working. And going back to the war theme, the American Civil War started with Mercury semi-square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So here is there's Venus, there's Venus and Mars, and so Mercury semi-square the Venus-Mars midpoint. And so this just gives us another idea of Venus and Mars, potentially the planets of war. So when Mercury semi-squares them, that's when they come into being, when they start to really activate. So that is something to think about when it comes to those two planets. It's not just about sexuality and attraction. It can be about war. And Mercury, well, that may talk about when it becomes obvious that war has happened, but Mercury may just be a trigger. It's bringing together Venus and Mars, and its potential. Now, turning to individuals with Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, I did mention populism, and one sort of populist leader is the Dutch politician Geert Wilders. I don't know Geert Wilders' time of birth, but Geert Wilders has Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, and so not everyone in the Netherlands is a fan of his. It's a minority party, but he has a hard core of support for his view. He's obviously right-wing, fairly sort of nationalistic, has real doubts about the value of excessive immigration, and people listen to him. And I'm sure a lot of people in the Netherlands hate him, but there are a lot of people that love him, that think he's great. That is the nature of Venus-Mars. And with Mercury aspecting the Venus-Mars midpoint, he's able to express a viewpoint, and he's able to express it sort of quite effectively. And in the UK, we've got Nigel Farage. And here's Nigel Farage's horoscope. He's the head of sort of a reform party. A very, very effective communicator. Some people hate him. A lot of people think he's wonderful. There's a good chance that he could be Britain's next Prime Minister, or at least the Prime Minister, after the next one, whatever. And so he has Mercury on a Venus-Mars midpoint. Say no more. I mean, that is totally explanatory, self-explanatory. It's obvious he's got Mercury on a Venus-Mars midpoint. A charismatic speaker, and a lot of people think that he's great. A lot of people can't stand him, but that is the nature of Venus-Mars. And continuing on the theme, of Britain's population, Britain's populace and what populism. If Nigel Farage is the most effective communicator, the second most effective communicator, in fact, you could argue he's an even better communicator than Nigel Farage, depends on your view, is George Galloway. So George Galloway was the sort of former Labour politician who is a strong supporter of Palestine, and he is, of course, a vocal critic of the Iraq War in 2003, and he is an incredibly good communicator. Again, some people like him, some people hate him, but here is his horoscope, and he has Mercury making a square to his Venus-Mars midpoint. So there's his Venus and Mars. So the midpoint is going to be at around 16 Scorpio, and so Mercury making that square to his Venus-Mars midpoint, that just allows him to be an effective communicator. And so I think that seems to work quite well. And another person who's very, very charismatic, who's had a huge sort of impact, who's relatively recently got out of prison, is Julian Assange. So Julian Assange, you probably know more about Julian Assange than me, and Julian Assange has Mercury square his Venus-Mars midpoint. So through sort of WikiLeaks, he was able to communicate this, and obviously his opinions count for a great deal, or did count for a great deal. And I think that an important part of Julian Assange's success was his charisma, and I think that was very much shown by his Mercury, on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And from a Russian perspective, a recent figure in Russian politics who is now dead, who had Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, was Alexei Navalny. So Alexei Navalny, he had a Venus-Mars sextile in his chart anyway. So Venus-Mars sextile, someone who was charming. A lot of people liked him. I don't think that Alexei Navalny was anything like as popular as people in the West think, by the way. I mean, I think that the West did very much boost his popularity, and they tried to demonstrate that he was popular, but he might have been an alternative president to Putin and so forth. I think that was just Western wishful thinking. But still, he had a following, and he was quite effective. He was quite effective in that video he made about Putin's palace, really mocking Putin, and he certainly had support. He had Venus-Mars sextile. Always good if you want to be a politician to have Venus-Mars sextile. And the Venus-Mars midpoint, he had Mercury semi-square the Venus-Mars midpoint. So that gave a real boost to his charisma. So I think looking at some of these politicians, whether it's Geert Wilders, Nigel Farage, George Galloway, Alexei Navalny, Julian Assange, I know he's not a politician. Viktor Orban, by the way, also in Hungary, also has Mercury as semi-square his Venus-Mars midpoint. I think we get an idea of how Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint might be working for certain people. And I think it can be, if you're a politician, quite a useful aspect to have. So that's all I'm going to say about the subject of Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.